Alrighty, we'll go ahead and get started. I am going to leave the door open just because it's so cold in here. Hopefully we can get some warm air in. The door to the outside is open, so I think I was able to check everybody off without reading your names out. So I'll keep trying that, and if I feel like I'm lost, I will call them out again. But I think I'm finally getting it down. So thank you for bearing with me. Alrighty, so we've been talking about, what is psychology? How do we do research in psychology? And now, from now to the end of the semester, we're gonna get into like the nitty-gritty topics in psychology, where we're actually gonna discuss more of like, what is this aspect of psychology? Why do we study it? How do we study it? What does that tell us about it? And so we'll be starting with motivation and emotion, which is actually, I believe, chapter 10. So not sure why it says 9 here. Look at that magic. It's all better. So couple quick things before we dive in. One is to be looking at your syllabus and looking at things that are coming up due. So a week from today was when I'll pass out your first exam. And we'll do a little review in class for that as well. Also, one of the things that was due Friday, but again, like anything else, you can still do it and get full points, no points off for being quote unquote late, is meeting with me. And so I know I think about a quarter of you have done that already. But if you haven't, you can use my link that's on the syllabus or on Blackboard to set up a meeting with me. I do those typically over Zoom or Hangouts just because I know you all are very busy. And that allows you to like do it from your car at lunch or something like that. But if you do want to meet in person, just let me know. We can easily do that before or after class. So that's what we will be diving into today. The other thing to just sort of keep in the back of your mind is you have a couple weeks still before this, but that topic for which myth you want to do for the infographic, that will be coming up around October 4th. And that's just a very brief assignment you turn in. But it's the reason I do that so early in the semester is to get you thinking about it. So you're not at the end of the semester going, oh shoot, I have this infographic to make, right? So just things to keep on the back burner in your mind. If you continue to have issues with Connect, you can let me know, but probably the best and easiest thing to do is if you go on Blackboard under Connect assignments, I've put their contact info from McGraw-Hill, their tech support. You can chat them, you can call them, I think you can like email them. They can fix that stuff. They do not allow me to actually go in on the back end and help you with your connectivity. So not only, it's not that I don't want to, it's just like I physically can't. So just wanted to make sure everybody is aware of that. And I do have to say, if you're able to catch up on those, by the time you get to the exam, people have told me in the past that the Connect assignments really help them when it comes to completing the exam. As a reminder, your exam, I will pass it out physically in class, but then you will have a whole, like whatever that ends up being, 48 hours to do it at home, open note, open book, all that good stuff, so that it is more of a measure of like how much you actually get the material than how much you can like memorize and spit back out at me. Alrighty, so I'm gonna go ahead and turn off these captions so that I can use the ones on Google Drive. There we go. All right, so we're going to talk about motivation. We'll also talk about emotion in this lecture. And we'll use some key examples. But this chapter, as with many of the chapters we'll cover from here on out, a lot of what the basics of what we'll do to start off is just talking about concepts. And what does this mean? You know, why is this a concept we care about in psych in particular? And so we're really going to dig into that. So what is motivation? And so one of the things I want to kind of point to here, because it's reminds me of one of my grad professors. It is down a little lower. There we go. Is this motivation poster, and you probably can't read it from there, but it says motivation. If a pretty picture and a cute saying are all it takes to motivate you, you probably have a very easy job. The kind, it says robots, but I would say AI are doing soon. One of my grad school professors hated these types of posters. He did study motivation with health. And he had one in his office that said meetings, and it was like a bunch of hands together. All of us together are dumber than each of us apart. So, you know, these motivational posters are certainly something to maybe poke fun at, but for other people, they're helpful and inspirational. So motivation itself can take many forms, but they all involve mental processes that select for and direct our behavior. So they all involve mental processes that select and direct our behavior. So psychologists are using the concept of motivation a little bit differently than we would use it like sort of in everyday talk, right? So we're talking about how we're connecting behavior we observe, maybe in ourselves or other people or even in animals, to our internal states. And that could be what we're thinking, the emotions we're experiencing, even our bodily cues like hunger, cold, things like that. How are those directing our observable behavior? Psychologists believe that motivation is what accounts for variability in behavior. If we did not have different internal motivation, humans would all walk around doing the exact same thing at the exact same time, right? If you all didn't have different internal motivation, right, you wouldn't be taking notes differently, right? So some of you prefer to type, some of you prefer to write, right? Some of you may have printed out my handout, some of you are just writing in the notebook, right? And you honestly, if you didn't have motivation, you just wouldn't be in class, right? So that already shows that you have some motivation. And it explains perseverance or keeping going despite adversity. So I may have mentioned, I don't know if I mentioned this in here, I mentioned it in one of my other courses. My big sport that I follow is gymnastics, and it could be any type of gymnastics. I follow NCAA, I follow the Olympic gymnastics, everything, men's, women's, what have you. And one of the things that's really interesting about the 3 women who were on the podium for the Olympic women's all around this year is that they all had to overcome a lot of adversity. So your bronze medalist was Suni Lee, who was the gold medalist at Tokyo. She has been training with 2 separate kidney diseases that at one point made her gain 40 pounds in fluid. So when she was so swollen, she couldn't put the grips on her hands you need to do bars as a gymnast. Rebecca Andrade from Brazil, she has torn the same ACL 3 times and come back from it. And then Simone Biles had the twisties, right? And had to overcome a lot of mental health issues related to the trauma of being abused by a doctor, someone she thought she should be able to trust, right? So all 3 of those women had to work through that in order to get to that podium, right? And motivation allows us to explain why people keep doing stuff like that and don't just say, I've hit a wall, there's so much stuff, I give up, right? Motivation can also relate our biology to our behavior, right? If we think about just innate biological drive that we have, right? Why do we get hangry, right? And then like that interferes with our ability to have like civil conversations with people, things along those lines. So we'll be talking about all those things. And there's a difference here that we make a distinction between drive and motive. So a drive is a biologically instigated or related motivation. So drive is biologically related motivation. And motive is an internal mechanism that directs behavior. An internal mechanism that directs behavior. So motive is often used to describe motivations that are learned rather than biologically based, right? You learn, I get good grades, my parents are happy, maybe they, buy me something or take me out to dinner. That is a learned motivation, right, to do well. So motive is an internal mechanism that directs behavior that is not biologically based. It's learned instead. So we all have both drives and motives. And in fact, we all to certain degrees have these different types of motivations. So intrinsic motivation comes from within, comes from inside that person. And it's a desire to engage in an activity for its own sake. So a desire to engage in an activity for its own sake. So we use the gymnastics example. This would be I think all three of the women who were on the podium have talked about this. I just love gymnastics so much. I enjoy doing it. That's why I fought through all of this to come back. Desire to engage in an activity for its own sake. An extrinsic motivation is a desire to engage in an activity to achieve an external consequence, typically a reward. So it's a desire to engage in an activity to achieve a reward, an external consequence. So rather than being internal, I just love doing this, it's external, I'm doing this to get something. And those women would probably be the first to tell you, they would be lying if they didn't say, I'm doing this partially to get another Olympic medal, right? I mean, that's kind of a big deal. So we all operate with both internal or intrinsic motivation and external or extrinsic motivation. And depending on the activity we're doing, we might rely more on one than the other. So for example, I know a lot of you are on sports teams, right? You may have extrinsic motivations that yeah, we want to win and maybe we want to win for the team or for Virginia Wesleyan. But then you probably also have intrinsic motivations of I just love doing this, right? Conscious motivation is just what it sounds like. It's you're aware of this. You have a desire to engage in the activity and you're aware of that desire. I know I want to do this. It's very obvious to me that I want to do this. Basically, let's go. An unconscious motivation is having a desire to engage in an activity, but being consciously unaware of the desire or why, right? Sometimes we're doing stuff and we don't realize why we're doing what we're doing or why we're pushing ourselves so hard in particular things, right? So someone who, let's say, has a lot of trauma from childhood may not remember that they used to get punished when they didn't do well on the sports field, right? Your brain literally tries to protect you from that, right? And so then they might engage in this activity and be like, I don't even know why I do this, but unconsciously, it's out of fear, right? Which is kind of sad. Unconscious motivations don't have to be negative. What defines them is just we're not aware of that motivation for why we're doing it. Oftentimes the only time we can sort of become aware of it is through therapy or some other type of assistance from someone who's not us, who has an outsider's perspective. So again, intrinsic, within, extrinsic, something outside of myself, conscious, I'm aware of it, unconscious, I'm not aware of why I'm doing this. All right, so we're gonna talk about hunger motivation because it's a really nice example of how you can have both biological, those drives, and things that are more mental, learned, your motives. And so we'll be talking about this from a multiple systems approach. And all that means is that we'll be looking at all aspects of why we get hungry and then what we do about it, right? Typically we're going to eat, but what are we going to eat? How much are we going to eat? All of that. So some of the biological factors that come into play here. Well, one is that we know that brain mechanisms control and also sort of respond to hunger. So for example, checking folks up here. So for example, we might have multiple mechanisms going on in our brains. So our brain is monitoring things like, what energy do we need to be doing the task we're doing, right? We need a lot less energy for a day where we're doing a Netflix binge than for a day where we're, I don't know, running a marathon, right? That's an extreme example. Also, nutritional state. Are there particular nutrients we're missing, right, that our body is craving? This can lead to really interesting things. So, for example, some women, when they're pregnant, will develop something called pica, P-I-C-A, where they eat things like clay or dirt. And what they come up with is that that's actually a craving for specific minerals like iron that's in that dirt. And if you put them on, say, iron supplements, those cravings to eat dirt go away. Food preferences, right? Those are going to go into our brain. And sometimes those evolve over time as we try stuff again, right? When I was 8, I probably never would have wanted to eat sushi, and now it's one of my favorite things, right? So our preferences change over time. Food cues in the environment, right? So just sitting in class here might be really different if I had like a giant pile of donuts, right? Or something else you really like up here, right? And you had to stare at it while I was talking. And then cultural demands can also be a part of this, right? So if your culture or your religion includes fasting as part of your practices, right? And this can go from some religions will fast sun up to sundown during certain holidays to folks who take communion on Sundays, fasting before they take communion, right? And so your brain is going to be using all of that information to process hunger cues and give you direction as to what to do about it. The key part of the brain here, and I don't have it on here, so I'm going to write it for y'all, is the hypothalamus. So this part of the brain is kind of monitoring all these different things at once. The other part of the brain that really plays a part here is the brainstem. And the brainstem is basically one of our most primal needs, well, really driven parts of our brain. The brainstem is what controls things like sleep and waking. It controls things we don't even have to think about, like our breathing and our heart beating. Okay, and it is monitoring things like blood sugar. Blood sugar matters even if you don't have diabetes, right? If you've ever not eaten or not had any carbs for a long time during the day, you start to feel like shaky. That's probably because your blood sugar is low. Things like fat, energy stores, nutrients being monitored using hormones throughout your body and other chemical messengers, right? So your brain is taking a lot of information and processing it very quickly so that we don't have to consciously sit here and think, how's my blood sugar doing, right? Which kind of nutrients am I actually hungry for? And how does that factor in with my cultural expectations, right? Our brain does this outside of our conscious awareness. Another thing that comes into play biologically is what's called set point mechanisms. And this is an idea that often surprises people who aren't familiar with it. This is the idea that everyone has a weight that is their quote unquote set point. And that if your fat cells fall below that, it will trigger eating behavior. It will signal eating behavior. So this is why, if you've ever known, say, family members who diet a lot, and then they'll go back up to a weight, and then they diet a lot, and then they go back up to a weight. That weight that they don't want to be at is probably their set point. That's probably where their body is supposed to be. But our cultural messages within the US and other Western cultures are telling them, oh no, you have to be skinnier than that, right? When their body is saying, this is where we're supposed to be. So, you know, not everybody is supposed to be super skinny. There's a variety. If you are super thin, super large, there may be problems with the chemical messengers in the systems because there is sort of like a normal range, if that makes sense. But this is something that is going to trigger eating. If you're below that set point, your body's going to say, hey, we need to get back to where we're supposed to be. There are also sensors in our stomach. Our stomach has pressure detectors, and those send a sense of fullness or emptiness to the brain, right? One of the problems with these sensors, however, is that they're a little delayed just because of how our body processes food. And so it can actually take about 20 minutes after you eat something for your brain to get the message, hey, we're actually full, right? So this is one of the things we would work on with our eating disorder clients is what we call eating mindfully, right? Taking your time, actually focusing on what you're eating, listening to your body while you eat. This is really, really hard to do even if you don't have an eating disorder. I did this for a while because we were training clients to do it, and I thought it was unfair if I didn't try to also do it. And to like sit and not be on your phone, watching TV, right? You know, paying attention to 20 other things and just like focus on what you're eating and how you're feeling in terms of hunger and satiety. Really, really challenging, but can be really rewarding. Also, just reward system preferences. Biologically, evolutionarily, we have a preference for sweet and high-fat foods. And this harkens back to when our ancestors were much more dependent upon the nutrients that were available to them in the natural environment. And so they had these mechanisms, these preferences to steer them towards calorie-dense foods that enabled them to survive when food supplies were unpredictable, right? So for example, for ancient peoples in Europe, taking down a mammoth would feed the whole community for weeks, months maybe, but it was also a huge investment. It's not something one person could do, typically the whole community, men, women, even children would come along to help process things, would have to be involved in that hunt, right? So you've got to have a lot of motivation to put that much time and energy into it. Also, it's very dangerous. People would die during mammoth hunts, right? Because they get speared by the tusks or trampled. But their bodies were telling them this is high fat, this is going to be really good, something that will sustain us for a while. This is also really interesting because when I worked with clients with bulimia nervosa or binge eating disorder, and we'll talk about what those are later in this lecture, they tended to, when they binged, when they ate a large amount of food in a short amount of time, to choose things that were sweet and high fat. It's like when you are depriving your body, often they would go a long time without eating before they binged. Your body switches back into this mode and it's like, we need to consume these things, right? They weren't binging on celery, right? Their body was saying, grab high fat things, grab high carb things. Exercise. How much you're exercising can influence your feelings of hunger and satiety. If you're engaging in moderate exercise that actually can suppress your appetite during the exercise. If you're engaging in very high intensity exercise, that can actually promote hunger. Maybe not surprisingly, because then you'll have to replace your calories, right? So all of those things are just honestly some of the biological things that go into our experience of hunger and our decisions about when, where, how we're going to get food and how much we're going to consume. So now we're going to look at some of the psychological factors, because yes, we have all these biological factors, but there are also motives, right? There are also things we've learned. One of them is our emotional state. So we talked about this when we were talking about research methods, right? That like sometimes we're eating because of emotions we're experiencing. Might be boredom, might be being really upset. So for example, but it depends on what type of upset. So for example, when we're fearful, we don't typically eat. That's partially because our body kind of goes into like a fight or flight. And one of the things that does is shut down digestion. But even something like, let's say, feeling depressed can have a really complex relationship with our behavior related to food. So some people, when they're depressed, will eat more. Some people, when they're depressed, will eat less. And in fact, when we get to psychological disorders later in the semester, we'll see that like both of those things are included as possibilities in how you diagnose someone with depression. And sometimes it can vary within the same person, and I am this way. So I am typically a stress eater. I'll eat a little bit more snacky wise when I'm stressed out. But when you do a PhD in clinical psychology, your last year, typically your 5th or 6th year, is an APA accredited internship. And you have to apply to various places, interview at places, and then you rank order all the places you interviewed, and you submit them to what I jokingly call the giant computer in the sky. It's the same computer system that does the match for residencies for medical doctors. And then that system decides if you match with any place and where you're going to match. So once you've submitted your rank order list, it is out of your hands, and it takes like 3-4 weeks to hear back. So this was like really anxiety provoking for me. I've never been so anxious in my whole life, because basically if I did not get matched, it meant I had to do a whole nother year of grad school. Like it put your life on hold. I was like about to get married. So I kind of want to be done with being in grad school, right? But then also, of course, there's all these things about like, oh, if I don't match, what does that say about me? Am I not good enough? All that perfectionistic stuff we get, right? So I just like could not eat the week before match. I would force myself to eat, but I could only eat like pasta with a little bit of oil or butter. Like I just could not eat anything rich. And then I found that I matched, shockingly, right? Since I was a good student, I shouldn't have been too worried. And I was able to eat again. But, you know, again, just within me, how stressful the situation is can determine how that's going to react to my eating behavior. Also learning. So we associate certain situations with eating. And sometimes this is just like we get in a rhythm, right? So this is why your body gets really hungry around meal times. It's like, hey, it's lunch, we normally eat then. But it's also conditioned in some ways. That's why when you go to the movies, you really are like, I have to get some popcorn, right? And the movies know this, they play with this, right? They like pump out that popcorn smell as you walk in. Like there's actually like evidence that they do this, right? To try to get you to buy some. This is also why when you sit down for a holiday meal, say Thanksgiving, you eat way more than you typically would. Because again, this is like a culturally sanctioned time where it's socially acceptable to eat more. And if your family is anything like my family, you have a mom or a grandma or an aunt being like, eat more, right? And so you're like, okay, more pie for me, right? So learning can be a big piece of this. And this can even be something simple like whenever I do well on something, I give myself a little treat, right? Or like for me, Chipotle is comfort food. Not that for a lot of people, but we had a Chipotle right basically outside our parking lot in grad school. And every week, me and my two best friends would go there for dinner, right? And that would be, we would like support each other and vent, and it just became comfort food because of that association. Another thing that's a huge psychological factor is culture. We react to cultural messages about food, but also about what our bodies should or should not look like. And, you know, I read this back in college, so the early 2000s. I did not write down like who said this quote. I regret it to this day because it has stuck with me and I cannot give it proper attribution. But one of the best descriptions I've ever heard of the culture in America is that we are a McDonald's next to a bikini store. Right? We have a lot of like readily available, really fatty foods, but then we also have these expectations that people will fit a certain really skinny norm. And that skinny norm fluctuates a little bit, right? So like the Kardashians, who were the standard, right, for so long, they're getting their Brazilian butt lifts undone because that standard is changing. It's becoming even more slim now. And then I'm sure in 5-10 years, we'll go back to a little more curvy, right? So it's a moving target, and the same for men, for folks who are non-binary, right? It used to be, and sometimes it still is like dad bod, do whatever, right? And then sometimes it's like, no, you gotta look like The Rock, right? And we all know like no one can actually look like The Rock. And so we're gonna talk a little more about cultural pressures, largely because I think this is really important to reflect upon, but also because this is really where the bulk of my research has been. So I focus on risk and protective factors for body image disturbance and disordered eating. And cultural pressures are one of the biggest one of those, particularly media pressures. So most theorists believe that the current Western standards of female attractiveness, and again, male attractiveness, non-binary attractiveness, have contributed to the rise of disordered eating and diagnosable eating disorders. The standards have changed throughout history towards a thinner ideal, and again, that will fluctuate with how much curviness you're allowed to have, right? But so, for example, in the 90s, they did some studies and they found that Miss America contestants had declined in weight by 0.28 pounds per year, and the winners had declined by even more. And so these are like the first Miss America contestants. As you see, just like swimwear was a lot less revealing back then. That was just the culture at the time. Athletic bodies, right? A little more curvy. And then in the early 2000s, this is what Miss America contestants were looking like. They also looked at Playboy centerfolds and found that they had lower average weight over time, and even their bust and hip measurements had declined. And this is that data represented graphically. And you can see in the late 90s, we started to see maybe some return, but again, it fluctuates now in really weird ways. Interestingly, one of the first times I ever taught, I was teaching in a normal psychology class, and I was going into a lot of detail on eating disorders. And I had a student who was Miss Ohio USA. I was teaching in Ohio at Kent State. And she came up to me afterwards and she was like, everything you're saying is spot on. And it's even worse when you're in the pageant. Like, whoa. Like the pressures to look a certain way, act a certain way, food wise, were very big. This is so commonly known now, right, that we even have memes about it. Media is portraying unrealistic body image ideals for the young felines. One of the things that when I first showed this to some of my friends that my friend loved, she's like, oh, it's a blonde, blue-eyed cat on the cover of the book, right? So we know this, right? We know that the ideal is unrealistic. And we have actual stats on this. So the average model, unfortunately, still is about 5'9", 110 pounds. BMI, if you're not familiar with it, is body mass index. It's not a great indicator of anything other than being a ratio of height to weight, because that's literally what it is. So you could have the same BMI as somebody who, like, they're all fat versus you're all muscle, or vice versa, right? So it's not an indicator of health, even though unfortunately it's used that way. But it at least gives you some comparison for this particular case. So the average model has a BMI of about 16.3. Average is 18.5. So she's below that, right? That doesn't mean that they're unhealthy. Some people are naturally that size, right? But for many models, they have to diet quite a bit to get there, right? And some runway fashion weeks have tried to mitigate this. So I believe Italy, you actually have to meet a minimum BMI to walk in their shows now. But then the problem is, okay, Italy does that, but maybe next week I'm going to Brazil and their fashion week does not do that. They want you to be skinnier, right? And so now I've got to go on like a crash diet to lose all that. The average woman is my height, 5'4". That's way less than I weigh. So the average woman has a BMI in like the normal range, whatever the heck that means. BMI is so arbitrary and racist, actually. We know that there are lots of different societal pressures that come in lots of different ways. So from young ages, we see toys, and we'll get more into images of this as we go through. We see people trying to fight that with like some body positivity and whatnot. But if you study a lot of that, it's still weird. So this was an ad that was like celebrated a few years back because they showed a range of body sizes, right? And people were like, wow, that's so great. Look how progressive. And the tagline here is perfect size, bigger bums, rounder stomachs. What better way to test our firming range? So this was a product that was supposed to firm your skin. And it's like, this is for fat people. I mean, that's not exactly what they're saying, it's kind of what they're saying, right? So it's sort of problematic in its own way. Hopefully this link works. So Dove did come out, and particularly Dove Canada came out with some really nice ads around this time. And this one will show you, it's not going to focus on the body, just the face, but everything that's done from like when a model would walk in until when that photo shoot was displayed in whatever type of advertising it was going to be displayed in.
Okay, folks, so break 5, please. Cameras rolling. And we're recording sound. Slated? Sounds great.
And so again, I'm always skeptical of companies doing this sort of like consumer activism, right? Because like, this is great, but are you still selling the firming cream and saying women who are not skinny need to use it, right? Or the company that makes Dove also makes Axe body spray. And they tend to have very sexist ads that are not empowering to women, right? So like, what are we really doing other than trying to sell? And so, but it's really interesting to think about, again, this woman came in, she was already naturally pretty, but the amount they did with makeup and hair, and then the amount of Photoshop, right, stretching her neck, making her eyes bigger, right? And then that is portrayed as this is what you're supposed to look like. When even that model couldn't look like that. Just to show you some really interesting things about Real Women versus Barbie. So again, the Real Woman being about my height, skinnier than me, they were about a size 14. Barbie would be 7'2", so we're like Shaquille O'Neal heights. But then she'd only weigh 101 pounds. That's a really scary low BMI. She would wear a size 4, and I think it would be a 4 mostly to accommodate her chest. Because her waist is the same circumference as her head. Right? If you're trying to do that to yourself, you're like, what? Everything is smaller. Her shoe size would be a 5. So again, imagine Shaquille O'Neal walking around on a women's size 5. She actually wouldn't be able to walk upright because she would be too top heavy and not be able to accommodate her feet. Her body would only have room for half of a liver and only a few inches of intestines as opposed to the usual 26 feet. So the results would be chronic diarrhea and death from malabsorption and malnutrition. Let me see. If she had the same, these measurements as a Real Woman, she would not have enough body fat to menstruate and thus would not be able to reproduce. And yeah, that's all kinds of different things. And again, like, this is not to just shame Barbie. I played with Barbies. I loved the Barbie movie. Barbie had some really interesting things, like having an astronaut doll 30 years before a female astronaut in the US actually went to space, right? But we also just need to be aware of, like, we're giving this to girls, Barbie's ages 3 and up, right? We're giving this to girls and say, play with this. They're going to look at it and they're going to want to look like this, right? And it might be subtle things. For me, it was like, I wanted to be blonde like Barbie. If I wear anything yellow, I look jaundiced. So like, I can't imagine me with blonde hair, right? But like, because Barbie is the person you want to be, you think about that. What's really interesting is that this tends to be something we see more in Western culture. So US, Canada, Western Europe, Australia. But so some people have argued, well, maybe it's just something geographically. This is one of my favorite studies because it pokes holes in that. So in the 2000s, they did a study with Old Order Amish folks. So if you're not familiar with these folks, they isolate themselves from society. They don't use electricity. They don't have TV. They build a lot of things and create a lot of things by hand. So they are not being exposed to the media, but everything else is the same. They live in places like Indiana, Pennsylvania, the mountains of Virginia and West Virginia, right? And so they are here physically, but the only difference is they're removed from this culture. And in this study, they showed that both young men and young women showed no body dissatisfaction, and they were very accurate in describing their own bodies. People who are in the mainstream Western culture are really bad at this. We tend to overestimate, say that we're bigger than we are. So it really might be this exposure to the media images that contribute to this normative discontent, this normative body dissatisfaction. Something like 99% of women and 91 or 2% of men would change something about their body if they could. Like, this is very widespread. As I mentioned, we know this is not limited to women. And so you will see these terms thrown around: bigorexia, or muscle dysphoric disorder, dysmorphic disorder, reverse anorexia. the technical diagnosis now for this is body dysmorphia with muscle dysphoric something. I don't know. You guys don't need to know that for the exam. I was just trying to remember the actual diagnostic name. But essentially, this is guys who want to bulk up and try to do so at the detriment of their own physical and mental health. So these are your folks that might be using steroids. You know, there are anecdotes about kids getting steroids as young as 5th grade from their coaches. Engaging in excessive exercise or weightlifting. I teach a whole class about eating disorders every other J term, and one of the videos that my students found and shared was this guy who was doing a workout that was literally 8 hours. Like, and it was just biceps for 8 hours. It's like, how do you do that if you have a job, right? And things along those lines. They engage in a lot of the same things and they experience a lot of the same things as women with the traditional eating disorders. So they might check themselves in the mirror repeatedly, put themselves on very strict diets. So for example, thinking they're eating healthy, but they're only eating, 400 calories a day of chicken and veg, or they go the other extreme. They're eating 10,000 calories a day of, protein, right? And not really looking at like, what does your body actually need? And they tend to compare themselves with other men. Action figures, just like Barbie, show these pressures, right? So these are the action figures when Star Wars first came out in the 70s and 80s. And these are the ones from when it re-released in the late 90s, early 2000s. And even Mark Hamill, who played Luke Skywalker, looked at this and said, like, who gave my action figure steroids? Like, I've literally never looked like that, right? G.I. Joe started off as literally just sort of an average Joe, right? And has morphed into this really, again, like the Rock-like physique. And again, some people can get there if they have a lot of money and time, right? But the vast majority of people are never going to get to that point, right? Simply because of the investment it needs. There are obviously certain groups at greater risk. I mentioned people can compete in pageants, but also models, actors, dancers, and certain athletes. And sometimes this is specific to wanting to be thinner, and sometimes it is having to gain or lose weight for a role. So for example, the actor Tom Hanks developed type 2 diabetes from all the times he's had to gain and lose weight from a role. So if you think about him in like Cast Away, right, where he had to be really sort of emaciated versus others. Of college athletes surveyed, 9% met full criteria for an eating disorder, while another 50% had symptoms. And again, men and non-binary folks can get traditional eating disorders. And in fact, gosh, it's been a while now, like 8 years ago, we had male and female cross-country coaches who were husband and wife, and my husband and I were friends with them. So we'd like go to dinner and chat with them. And they told us that he had had way more eating disorders in his male athletes than she had ever had in her female athletes. Gymnasts and ballet dancers tend to struggle with this. Up to 15% of student ballerinas may have truly meet criteria for anorexia. This is a picture from the 70s of a very emaciated ballerina. They actually used to do cocaine just to have enough energy to perform. And like one of the things I see here is like her point two is actually loose on her foot because she's so skinny. And this is someone from the early 2000s. So unfortunately, we haven't necessarily gotten better, right? All right, so we will stop there for today and pick back up talking about social pressures on Wednesday. Oh, perfect. Hang on.